there is shit on the lettuce. And House Democrats are now opening up an investigation into whether or not the company responsible knowingly used their political influence to mislead their customers intentionally. You've probably heard about the cyclospora parasite outbreak, but you've never seen an investigation this deep. So grab your flashlight and follow me down the trail, because tonight, things are about to get crazy. Okay, so all of this comes from a Civil Eats article, I'll put it up here somewhere, that dropped basically yesterday. There's a sitting member of Congress who sent Taylor Farms, the company, a letter saying that this whole timeline raises concerns. That the company, quote, may have attempted to leverage political donations and connections inside the Trump administration to influence the scope, scale, and findings of the FDA's investigation. Leverage political donations to influence a federal investigation. Things have gotten so out of hand that they are now opening up a whole investigation. Okay, I need you to know how serious that is. So, what we're about to get into tonight, some of it is alleged, and a lot of it is fully backed by a primary source that I have found. All of it will be listed in the description. As always, do your own research and think for yourself. So how in the world did this company influence the federal investigation? Well, let me tell you. The Wall Street Journal broke the story. They had exclusive information from people that said that Taylor Farms called the White House to try and get more time before the FDA announced publicly that they were involved in this parasite outbreak. Now, I don't know if that's illegal, but it damn well should be, okay? So that's what led to this whole investigation. But let's back it up a little bit. Let's go through the entire timeline, because you better believe that I have one. Back to the beginning, who is Taylor Farms? You probably heard this name in connection with some hoop lettuce, okay? If you have eaten a bagged salad or a salad kit in, I don't know, like the last 10 years, or a side salad or lettuce from basically any fast food chain, there's a real chance that it came from Taylor Farms. Taylor Farms, technically Taylor Fresh Foods, they started the company in 1995. And they turned it into a $7 billion company. They have about 30 processing facilities, and back in 2024, according to Taylor Farms themselves, they were producing over 244 million servings of produce each week. Each week. Now, they grow a lot of this produce themselves, and for the rest of it, they actually partner with local family-owned farms in California, Arizona, Mexico, and other places. And here's the thing that makes this whole outbreak so tricky and so dangerous, is that they themselves have stated that about 50% of their products live under their label, Taylor Farms label. And the other 50% of their products are white label products. That means that they sell these products to retailers and other stores, and it doesn't even have a label on it. So the store that buys the product can put their own label, whatever they want, on the product. So it's so hard to track down exactly where this lettuce is ending up. So if you buy a product from Walmart, a bagged salad or spinach or something like that, that says market side on it, that's a white label product from Taylor Farms. So you could literally be eating shit lettuce and have no idea because the label doesn't have the brand name on it. And right now, with the cyclospora outbreak, what we're up to is over 4,000 confirmed cases, with 7,000 other cases still pending. And it just keeps going up. But what I do want to point out is that Taylor Farms is the only brand that has actually been tied to it in some way. Now here's the thing. I want to state this before moving forward. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a lawyer, okay? I'm just a girl doing her own research from the comfort of my own home. So while I do have my own opinions, and I don't shy away from that, I want you to take what I say and think for yourself, do your own research, look at my sources, fact check what I'm saying. All of this is just for you to make your own decision, even though I also have my own opinions. Now let's go back and let's talk about the pattern, because this is not the first outbreak that Taylor Farms has had. Far from it, actually. Back in 2013, Cyclospora, the same parasite that's plaguing the country right now, they had another outbreak of it, again, 13 years ago. And it got traced back to the same Mexico facility that's currently being traced right now. And back in that first outbreak, over 600 people got sick across 24 states. So it was a much smaller outbreak, but a much more widespread one. And the company voluntarily shut down production while everybody scrambled and tried to figure out where it was coming from. And to be honest, they never fully figured it out. The facility in Mexico was suspected of being the source, but even in the government's own documents, they fully said that they couldn't really pin down where it came from. The same company that has been through this exact thing before is now currently facing an outbreak of a much larger scale. And we're gonna come back to that later, obviously. And honestly, that 2013 outbreak is not the only thing on the record. Far from it. There's actually a whole string of outbreaks, and you can go see that. I'll make my timeline public. You can go in and actually see how many outbreaks this company has had. They've had outbreaks from E. coli, from Listeria, from Salmonella, on basically every single one of the products. Some of them made the news, some of them had public recalls, but the scarier thing is that a lot of the outbreaks had no public recall and no public-facing statement at all. Some of them, they only called the customers, being the restaurants, the wholesalers, and they never actually said a single thing to the public. And in some cases, they stopped production, but did not recall the products that were already making people sick. I would say allegedly, but that's not alleged, that's a complete fact. And you might be wondering, okay, well, have these facilities ever really been inspected? Because if they're having all of these outbreaks, you have to assume that something is going wrong. And there have been a few times that regulators and inspectors have walked through. They have a lot of facilities, so I wasn't able to go through every facility, but the things that some of these inspectors did find were a little bit concerning. We're talking dirty surfaces, workers that weren't washing their hands, and almost every time that they found something, they never actually had any penalties. There was no legal enforcement or anything like that. Sometimes it was money, but to a company that's making $7 billion, a few hundred or a few thousand, it doesn't really mean anything. I do want to flag that back in November of last year, 2025, OSHA went and inspected a New Jersey vegetable processing facility, and they were inspecting it because a worker had died. And so they went in and they took a look, and they actually flagged them for some very serious concerns. Most of those concerns were actually what led to the worker's death, and those were being lockout and tagout procedures that were not being followed. There was no training in place on the lockout and tagout procedures, meaning that equipment wasn't fully shut down before someone went in to clean it. And that's what led to that worker unfortunately dying. But when they went in there, they also found things like what I said earlier. They were pulling out equipment or utensils from a sanitizing solution, and they were immediately using them on produce instead of letting it air dry like the manufacturer said. And so because of that, sanitizing solution was getting on the produce. They also said that people were putting hand sanitizer over their gloves, which we also found corroborated in a Taylor Farms video themselves. But they also weren't letting that air dry at all, and so it was wet and they were touching produce with the wet hand sanitizer on the gloves. So all of that to say, they have run into a few problems, a few inspections, and when OSHA went in back last November, they ended up fining the company over $1 million for all of the violations that they found. Which again is like not even a slap on the wrist. What can you do, I guess? Alright, so at the same time that all of this is going on, all of the outbreaks are happening, they started in 1995, they've had all of these outbreaks since, they've grown massively ever since. Well, they were also building something else, and that is political access and influence. They had always been donating money to super PACs, organizations, even political candidates, but starting around 2020, all of this just ramped up. They started spending a lot more money on these people and organizations that they cared about, I guess. They were writing 6-7-figure checks, and most of these were to Republican companies specifically. Republican super PACs, Republican leadership funds, even funding a political candidate who was a Republican. And there's one specific guy that I have looked into who plays a big role in all of this, and that is Trent Morris. Trent Morris built his career in Florida Republican politics. He moved into a senior White House job during Trump's first administration, and eventually he leaves and he ends up as a lobbyist. But before we get too far into that, I want to talk about the food traceability rule, because all of this is happening all at the same time. The FDA and Congress have been working on the food traceability rule for quite some time. And basically, it would force companies like Taylor Farms to be able to trace any one single product back to its original source within 24 hours. So this was proposed in 2020, it was finalized in 2022, and it was supposed to be enforced by 2026. So now, we're in July of 2026, and guess what? That rule is still not being enforced. And why is it not being enforced? Because back a few months ago, there was a dinner that they hosted where they found that most of the companies were not ready for the rule to go into place. And so they pushed it back. Might there have been some more political influence there? We're about to find out. So, back in January of 2025, two things happened in the same month. Trent Morris, a lobbyist guy, he takes that senior job in the White House personnel office. And a major law firm, Sidley Austin, they registered to lobby on behalf of Taylor Farms. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that those two things are connected. I am telling you that they happened in the same month. Do with that what you will. Okay, but here's where it gets a little bit sharper, so listen up. In the first 3 months of 2025, Taylor Farms' lobbying spend with Sidley Austin, it hits an all-time high. And that same quarter, the FDA announces that they are going to delay the food traceability rule, the one that we just talked about, by 2.5 years. Okay, as of now, enforcement is not going to take place until July of 2028. And then, 6 days after that announcement, Taylor Farms donates $1 million to MAGA Inc. Now, Taylor Farms has come under a lot of scrutiny for all of the donations to Republican organizations. And I can confirm all of that is true. Now, to be fair, and I have to be fair here, the owner of Taylor Farms, Bruce Taylor, he went on Forbes to kind of defend all of this, and he gave a different explanation. I want you to see if this passes the smell test for you, because for me, it doesn't, but we'll get into that. Bruce Taylor says that the donation to MAGA Inc., it bought him a seat at a dinner where they were discussing the tariffs. He says that it had nothing to do with the traceability rule at all, and in fact, they wholeheartedly agree with and support the traceability rule because, and I quote, "we've already been compliant." Yeah, okay. And here's the reason why that doesn't ring true to me. When you look up the money that Taylor Farms spent with Sidley Austin lobbying, every filing that you can find, it will have a specific code or a couple of them based on what they were lobbying about. Now, it doesn't give an actual description of what they were lobbying for or the actual stance of the company, But it does give us kind of a broad general piece as to what they might have been arguing about. And here's the thing. Right before the food traceability rule was delayed, you remember how I told you that they had spent all of this money in that first quarter of 2025 for lobbying? That report is the first time that the code BUD shows up on one of the lobbying registration forms. Now the code BUD tracks for budgets and appropriations. Now you kind of have to have a very basic understanding of how they create this rule to begin with. So the FDA had drafted up the whole food traceability rule. They finalized it in 2022. And then when they realized that people needed more time to become compliant, they didn't draft up an entirely new rule because that would have required a whole new set of approvals. What they did instead was they added a rider onto the financials of the rule. The rider is basically like an add-on. We're going to give you all of this money for the rule. However, you can't use this money to enforce the rule until 2028, like we talked about. So when the FDA decided to delay the enforcement of the rule, it was a financial question. It was a budget meeting to discuss how they were going to add that little add-on to the budget and the financials of that rule, if that makes sense. So the lobbying disclosure form in the first quarter of 2025 being the first time that they were lobbying for budgets. Meanwhile, the FDA is having this conversation about the budget of the food traceability rule. That's pretty telling. Again, we have no hard evidence on what side they were lobbying for, but that's pretty damning evidence to show that that's likely what was being talked about. The timing lines up in a way that looks pretty bad. Also, because none of the lobbying disclosure forms have anything to do with tariffs or trade policy or anything like that. All of them have to do with agricultural policies, healthcare policies, and then that one budget policy. So maybe what he's saying is true, but the evidence isn't quite lining up with that. And I do just want to say one more thing before we get into what happened this year, because it matters for how much you trust anything this company says a little bit later. Throughout all of the outbreaks that they have had, with all different illnesses, Taylor Farms kind of has a track record of trying to keep things really hush-hush, keep things out of the public eye. So back in 2024, they had an outbreak tied to the romaine lettuce. However, their name never came out in any of the FDA announcements or their own announcements, nothing. It only ended up becoming public later because of court filings. Okay, it took a lawsuit for them to actually admit that their name was tied to the outbreak, and even then, Taylor Farms denied any and all involvement despite being tied to the outbreak. You can form your own opinion on the company, but I want you to know all of the context before going in. Alright, so finally, let's catch us up into this year and what happened with this current outbreak of Cyclospora. Cases started showing up in May, and there's a little bit of a discrepancy whether it was May 1st or May 13th. Regardless, it was May of this year, 2026. And the cases started coming up in Michigan. And they started climbing and getting higher and higher all throughout the month of June. But basically at this point, nobody outside of a couple of state health departments know anything about this yet. So in mid-July, the FDA and the CDC began their investigation. Now they had been told about the outbreaks by the state of Michigan. At this point, they only knew about 400 cases. On July 16th, the FDA puts out their first public announcement, and importantly, they don't name Taylor Farms. Instead, they named Taco Bell and a single supplier in Mexico. And according to them, they were legally required to withhold the name because of trade secrets. People have been fighting for the FDA to not use that reason, because tracing an outbreak to a company should not be a trade secret. That's ridiculous. But regardless, that's what they said in the announcement on July 16th. So, that same day, July 16th, Taylor Farms uses this guy, Trent Morse, to call the White House. Trent Morse being that same guy who a year earlier had gotten a job in the White House personnel office. And when they call the White House says, hold on a minute, and they get the FDA on the same call. One account says that Taylor Farms was worried about how poorly the investigation had gone, and they wanted to expose the gaps. Another account says that they were sad that they had been excluded from the investigation. Either way, that sounds really condescending to me, but okay, whatever. So they had this phone call. Allegedly, Taylor Farms tries to get them to hold off on announcing publicly that Taylor Farms might be implicated. Apparently, they also thought that the FDA did not have enough evidence to back up the claim that Taylor Farms was linked. I don't know if they already had a positive link or if they had it already. Regardless, Taylor Farms was claiming that they did not have the evidence to prove it, allegedly. After Taylor Farms hangs up the phone, the White House stays on the line with the FDA to go over all of the evidence that they have. And the evidence that they have doesn't only include a positive test for cyclospora on the lettuce. They also have epidemiological and traceback evidence to show exactly where that lettuce came from. So they're not just relying on one test. And the thing is, the White House concluded after that conversation that they did have enough evidence, and they said, you know what, go ahead and post it. So that same day, the FDA then announced that Taylor Farms was linked. The next day, on July 17th, Taylor Farms voluntarily recalls all of the iceberg lettuce that came from the farm in Mexico. This included market-side products from Walmart across 27 states, and it also included food service products, which includes food that went to restaurants and things like that. And that same day, Taco Bell announces that they are not going to be buying from Taylor Farms anymore. And then it gets a little bit messy, okay? On July 18th, the FDA comes out with another announcement, and they said definitively that they had a positive test on Taylor Farms lettuce. And even worse, it was lettuce that Taylor Farms had not included in the recall, meaning that there could still be contaminated lettuce out there on the market. And even worse, the next day, on July 19th, the FDA said that the positive test that they had was a false positive. Now, this caused a whole host of issues. First and foremost, and most importantly, being that it caused widespread confusion and panic, and this is, I think, where everything went downhill for the general public. Because what do you mean? You came out saying that it was definitively a positive test, only for 1 day later to say, actually, we don't actually know for sure. Now, they weren't rolling back their entire statement. They were still holding on to the fact that they had the epidemiological and traceback evidence to show that Taylor Farms was still implicated. But they were reversing the one positive test that they had. Taylor Farms, they ran with it, okay? They posted publicly on social media that the FDA apologized to us. They have also many times since stated that there's no positive test out there implicating us in this outbreak. So they are really running with the idea that it's not their fault at all because this one positive test was rolled back. And of course, the FDA had to come out and say, no, we did not apologize to them. We hold on to what we said. The only thing was the positive test is false because cyclospora apparently is notoriously hard to pinpoint. I still think, and most of the public now still thinks, that it's very fishy that this phone call allegedly happened with the White House 3 days later. The FDA is rolling back a positive test. Thing is, they didn't roll back the entire statement, right? They're still naming Taylor Farms. The timing of that is very suspicious, so it's worth naming and it's worth looking into for sure. Let's talk about what Taylor Farms was actually telling the public. They had made a few statements. One of them being, of course, we're not officially named in the outbreak, but out of an abundance of caution, we're going to shut down all production from that farm in central Mexico. And they also stated that they were going to be conducting a review of the protocols in that farm. But here's where it gets a little bit fishy. In one of their claims, they said that they were going to have independent experts come out and do an inspection. Except that, in a different statement, they actually said that they were going to have our own specialists internally review the food safety practices. And by the way, I couldn't corroborate the idea that they had an independent expert come out. No firm has been named, no independent contractor, no invoice, no published findings, nothing. So we actually have no idea if they were doing any sort of review at all, especially with this being a privately held company. That makes this entire investigation so much harder. So, I don't know. I don't know if they've actually done jack shit. All I do know is that Taco Bell confirmed that they were not going to be buying from Taylor Farms anymore. Go Taco Bell, my guy. The other thing I want to flag about their public statements, you should go look at the public statements they have put out now for this outbreak versus the public statements that they put out in 2013 for a different Cyclospora outbreak, because they are eerily similar. We continue to be very confident in our Mexico operation, with a production suspension expected to last several weeks. It's basically word for word, just 13 years apart. They just come up with one statement that they would put for the exact same situation. They were just like, yeah, copy and paste, nobody will know? Babe, I will know, okay? If anybody will find it, it will be me, so. It doesn't prove that anything that they said this year is false, but it does look a lot less like what's actually happening on the ground, and it looks a lot more like a crafted PR statement. I love the idea that they just happened to run in to the exact same situation, and they were just like, yeah, whatever, it's like, we've got it saved in our file, like, just go put it back up again. And here's the other thing, is that back in 2013, when they had their first outbreak on the same farm, the FDA told the company in writing that they had to go through and determine if their practices were leading to the outbreak. Essentially, they had to tell the FDA if there was an actual risk of Cyclospora on the farm. And remember, that's partially because the FDA couldn't officially link the farm to the outbreak. But guess who never got back to the FDA on that? Guess who never did a review and posted it anywhere publicly? The FDA came out and said, yeah, they never gave us that. Here we are 13 years later with another outbreak. Thousands of more cases than the first time. Crazy how that happens. So the last piece of this that is the most important to really talk about is how in the world is this farm having these many outbreaks? And that is, what are the actual manufacturing processes? Are there any gaps that might have led to an outbreak like this? And the most important piece of it to look into is, how is the produce being washed? So Taylor Farms developed their own system back in the early 2000s, like 2007-ish, and it's called Smart Wash, TM. And on their own website, they do claim that it's USDA tested and verified. Basically, it's a chlorine-type wash that they use in all of their locations to wash their food. It's got chlorine, obviously, but it's also got something called sodium hypochlorite. And without getting too technical, because I'm not a chemist, it basically creates a couple of different compounds that are supposed to kill all of the bacteria on the surface of the produce. They also flush everything with nitrogen, all of the lettuce, but that's more as a preservative to keep it from browning, keep it really fresh. I don't know enough to know if that would be harmful for consumption. All I'm going to say is that that's what they do. They also claim that the time between actually harvesting the lettuce and getting it into a processing plant is only 4 hours or less. And they say that they have the capability to trace back any one product to its original source. I don't know if they had that before the traceability rule was finalized or not. All I know is that that's what they claim now. Okay, so that all sounds pretty good, right? But here's the problem. Taylor Farms and the Smartwash solution, they have all of these good claims that they're going to kill all of this bacteria, and they name E. coli and Salmonella as examples of how they can kill that bacteria. And apparently, it is actually really effective at E. coli and Salmonella. Because the thing is, chlorine and the sodium hypochlorite, they don't kill cyclospora. According to the FDA, chlorine, bleach, and other disinfectants, they don't kill cyclospora. The only things that actually work are hot soapy water on surfaces, and then on produce, just hot water and scrubbing it with a brush. That's the best that you can do. So the entire flagship wash system, the thing that they market as USDA tested and verified, the thing that's supposed to be the whole reason that you trust this company with your salad, it's not built to handle the exact organism that just made potentially 11,000 people sick across the United States. Really unfortunate for them. I also just want to say that in all of my research, everything that Taylor Farms has put out about the processes and the facilities, they always talk about how they're washing the produce, they talk about their supply chain, how they're getting the lettuce to and from, but I never heard anything about the sanitization of the equipment. So that's just one thing I want to flag. I'm sure they have some sort of process, but they don't talk about it. And okay, I have to bring this up. And this is not a verified claim, but it is an accusation that keeps coming up. There is a California union for the labor workers that Taylor Farms has on its farm. And it keeps publicly accusing Taylor Farms of not letting their workers take bathroom breaks. We're talking the farm workers. Again, I have not independently verified. There's never been any litigation. I have no public documents to look up or show you on that. And again, that's in California, not Mexico. But if that were the case, if you're a worker getting up at 2 o'clock in the morning, you're out in the fields all day long and you're not allowed bathroom breaks, where are you gonna take a shit? And then remember where cyclospora comes from. That's all I have to say. Okay? That's all I have to say. Again, think for yourself. I am not making an accusation. That's all. And the biggest thing that I want to flag here is that while most of Taylor Farms locations are within the United States and are checked regularly by OSHA, CDC, FDA, the farm that keeps having the outbreak is in Mexico. OSHA, CDC, FDA, they have no authority over a farm in Mexico. Now, they do have regulations on what food can come into the country, but it's all self-verified. The person importing the food from the country has to somehow prove that that farm or that location, that source, is compliant with the FDA regulations. So in this case, with Taylor Farms importing their own food from their own farm in Mexico, that means that they are self-reporting. Any verification process that the farm in Mexico has to go through is done by Taylor Farms itself. And the FDA somehow just takes that as proof. There is a private certification that the farm in Mexico has, and most of Taylor Farms locations also have. However, it is currently suspended. And this is for international food safety protocols. Their certification is suspended for the farm in Mexico. I don't know if that's in response to this outbreak or if it happened before. Regardless, all I know is that their certification hasn't been suspended. So this is kind of the only thing that we can rely on to question whether or not that farm in Mexico is up to our US regulations. And it's currently suspended. So when a company tells you that they've got the best food safety in the industry, and by the way, they'll also tell you that they spend $200 million a year on food safety, I just want you to actually know what their safety systems are, and what they're built to catch and not catch. And it seems like, maybe, allegedly, there was a gap, and that's where Cyclospora slipped through. Alright, so back to that investigation that I told you about in the beginning. The House Democrats stated that Taylor funds may have attempted to leverage political donations and connections inside the Trump administration to influence the scope, scale, and findings of the FDA investigation. So now you know about the $1 million donation to MAGA 6 days after the regulation delay has benefited them. You know about the lobbyist that they used to make this phone call, how he had a White House job a year before making that call on their behalf. You know about the lobbying disclosures that started mentioning budget policy in the exact same quarter that the rule budget policy was being written. You know that this company has told this same story in the same exact kind of situation before, in almost the same words. And you know that they might not be the most trustworthy and honest company out there. I would be shocked if they were. That's not automatically a conspiracy. It might just be how these lobbying and crisis management and PR systems actually work, except that it was unique and odd enough that they are now opening up an investigation. And by the way, a former FDA official has also come out and said that the way that the administration and the company handled this outbreak was catastrophic, and that it should trigger an external investigation into what happened here. And it looks like we're getting just that. So here's what I actually think about all of this. Honestly, even without the whole bribery phone call thing, this to me is disturbing because of how normal this all is. I mean, when did it become commonplace for a company, just a company in the US, to have ties into the White House? And you will not believe the lobbying disclosures that I have found. I mean, even just ones that are not connected to this investigation at all. I mean, every big name company out there is using their money to influence policy. And that to me is terrifying. In an era when even the general public, the constituents, opinions are not taken into account, and the administration can just go do whatever they want without any regard for the general public, and yet they will take the money of the big corporations and they won't do anything that they want because they're paying them. It's disgusting. And I will also say, Taylor Funds is one of the biggest donors and actually one of the helping founders of a research agency behind produce safety standards. Now, this could be taken as a good thing, right? They're giving all of this money to an organization that's going to help fund, even better food safety practices. Or you could also see it the way that I do and question why in the world this research agency is taking money from big corporations directly involved in the outcome. Because it gives them an incentive to only put out research findings to the public that don't harm the people who are funding them. So if that organization conducts a big study on smartwash, TM, right, and they find that the smartwash solution is actually harming people and it's not good for public consumption, that would really hurt Taylor Funds. And are you telling me that you're going to publish that knowing that Taylor Funds has given you over $2 million in the past couple of years? There's an incentive there to not be fully honest, and that's what I don't like. You're allowed to disagree with me, and that's kind of the whole point. I would love to hear it in the comments if you do. But you guys, that is everything I have on this Taylor Funds Cyclospora outbreak. Now, this is the first episode, and I should have said this in the beginning. This is the first episode in my new series into the food industry of America, and we're going to be getting into literally everything you can think of. Because I want to find out if I can eat anything in the grocery store, or if everything I eat will make me sick and get me cancer. So, if you're interested in that as well. First of all, thank you for staying until the end, and second of all, don't forget to subscribe so that you see when my next video comes out. And that's all I have. You guys, I'll see you in the next one. Bye.